Good morning, everybody. I'm Maureen Penfold, Managing Partner of Moore Kingston Smith, and I'm delighted to welcome you all today. Great to see so many attendees to join us in our International Women's Day webinar in support of Break the Bias. Thank you to everyone on our panel and to Paul for hosting. And it's really pleasing to see so many people engaging today, because I think this is fundamental to our future, the subject, particularly in this really circumstances we find ourselves across the world today. I think it's ever more important. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Paul Samra, my partner, who is going to be the host today, who will introduce our fantastic panel. And I'm sure it's going to be a very lively debate. And effectively, once again, thank you to Paul, thank you to the panel, and thank you to all of you for joining us. Enjoy the next hour. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Maureen, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on International Women's Day. I echo Maureen's comments and would add that celebrating International Women's Day is so important because it encourages conversation and reflection. The first International Women's Day was held in 1911, believe it or not, and was centered around women's rights to work, vote, and hold public office. We've come so far, but we've got a long way still to go, which is why International Women's Day is still very much part of a modern day culture. Every year on the 8th of March, it is celebrated as International Women's Day to celebrate the cultural, political, and socio-economic achievements of women. As we hear from our panel, please do post your questions, comments and observations in the Q&A function rather than the chat function. Would make it quite a lot easier for us. So in the Q&A, please, at the bottom of your screen. And a reminder that this is being recorded and the recording will be made available in the next day or so. So before we kick off our discussion, perhaps I could ask each panelist to introduce themselves and to perhaps reflect on their own personal experience of bias. So if I kick off with Jani, Jani, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Paul, and thank you, Maureen. Just to say it's wonderful to be here, and I want to thank Moore Kingston Smith for bringing the community together to celebrate International Women's Day. I'm Jani Guest, I'm CEO of Creators Inc., which I founded in November of last year. And prior to that, I was the managing director of independent films from 2002. As you can tell from my accent, I am not born and bred British. I've had what I call a hybrid upbringing. I was raised Hindu and grew up inside an ashram, which for those of you who don't know that, that's a Hindu monastery. And I lived there until I was 13, but I've remained part of an ashram community throughout my entire life. I spent much of my childhood with monks and nuns. And because of the nature of their vows, they were trained not to judge others, that all were equal, irrespective of gender, race, or class. The ashram residents came from all over the world. And because we were in a community that was focused on a spiritual life and selfless service to humanity, our own physical appearances were irrelevant. And I only mention this because it has greatly influenced how I have applied the Eastern spiritual principles I was raised with to the experiences of bias I have come across in the secular world. Unfortunately, bias is part of human nature, and most of us have experienced it, and also most of us, we have to admit, are guilty of it. Bias is a judgment, and we all judge each other, even if those judgments don't fall under the standard list of boxes to tick. We judge others according to the views we have of our own selves. When I first moved to the UK in 1995, the advertising business was dominated by men, primarily Caucasian men, and from a certain class. So a young Korean girl, American girl, walking into a room doing a job that really hadn't existed in the marketplace before was a surprise. For the first time, I felt like an outsider because of the shape of my eyes. I had never been made aware of or conscious of that difference. There were inappropriate suggestions on how I might use being female to get ahead, and everyone assumed that I was Chinese, Japanese, never Korean. In fact, there was only one other woman at the time who worked in production, and although we look completely different to this day, I'm often mistaken for her. But despite such comments, I remembered some of the teachings that I was taught by my spiritual master growing up. And she said, equality must be created in the mind. And presently, our minds are ruled by notions of inequality. As long as this prevails, society's growth and development will remain incomplete, like a half-blossomed flower. So it's wonderful to be here as part of a discussion on how we can create awareness and collectively spread the message of equality within society so that all bias may dissolve. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jani. Fascinating. And we'll reflect on some of those points you made later in the session. Steve, can I turn to you and your story? Thank you.
And there was me hoping you didn't come to me next, as that was far more impressive than what I have to say. But yeah, I'm Steve, father of 3 amazing girls, and due later this year to be married to another amazing lady. I've worked for predominantly one company throughout my life, a company called Page Group, or Michael Page, as many people might know it. I've been there 37 years. I joined when we were 200 people recruiting accountants for banks, predominantly in one country, if I'm honest, but just about in 3. We're now 8,100 in 37 countries. 14% of our business comes from the UK, obviously 86% from other geographies around the world. And I've been very lucky to be CEO of Michael Page, or Page Group, for the last 16 years. We're a FTSE 200 company. 3 years ago, actually in 2 days' time, so I've got an anniversary in 2 days, I had a very near fatal accident. When I say very near, it was very, very near. And it resulted in me now being paraplegic. So I'm in a wheelchair, although clearly you can't see that, and will be for the rest of my life, just so we're clear, as I often get asked, how long are you going to be in the wheelchair? So the rest of my time, however long I'm lucky enough for that to be. And today, I suppose, I've become intersectional, because I would imagine that before my accident, I was probably regarded as very non-diverse, not diverse in any way at all. I was a 6'4" ex-rugby playing white guy. 3 years ago, I became disabled, and today I probably became old, as I've just turned 60. So in celebration of International Women's Day, a little later than 1911, but I was born. So today I became 60, so I'm now intersectional, old and disabled.
Thank you, Steve. Yes. Now I can turn to Chloe. Hello, Chloe.
Good morning. Happy birthday, Steve.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chloe Davies. So the day job, I'm head of social impact for Lucky Generals, the creative agency, and we get to do some really amazing work. But in advertising, we tell people stories. So I guess my story, what I look like and what I sound like, are 2 very different things. And when I could go to school, which was not as long as you, Steve, but still just quite a bit away, you could go to school in the borough that your parents work. So I lived in East London, in Walthamstow. It wasn't as gentrified as it is now. It was the back end of London, and just about bordered Zone 3, Zone 4. But my mum worked at Peter Jones in Sloane Square, and so I could go to school in Kensington and Chelsea. And my primary school was in the King's Road. I went to Holy Trinity, and my secondary school was Lady Margaret School for Girls, which was the other end, in Parsons Green. And so I was very privileged to have an amazing education, which meant that where I lived, and girls who looked like me and girls who were continued to be stereotyped, and very much as you see the stereotypes of Black women today, I was afforded an education that was outside of that. But within that, as Yanni said, you create your own bias, but also I grew up believing that I could do absolutely anything that I wanted to do. My dad told me at 9, Chloe, you're Black and you're female. It's going to be harder for you than it is for a lot of other people. So please don't grow up with a chip on your shoulder. And there's nothing that you cannot do unless you try. That had been my ethos my entire life. So I navigated through a school system that I just used every opportunity I possibly could. Started work at 16 and 4 days old. My mum said, I've cut your pocket money. Don't embarrass me. I was a Saturday only girl at Peter Jones in the haberdashery department. And I tried and did everything I could. And that was probably one of the first times that I had this reminder that I didn't fit, or that I didn't look as I should, or actually that I should be less. I had an amazing manager. His name was Duncan Kent. And at 17, he said, Chloe, I see something great in you. So I'm going to give you the opportunity. Go and be great. Mess it up on your own. That's not the words that he used. And I started on the management program. And I was a manager by 18. And I've continued to be one now. And this year I will be 40. And I'll be very honest, along my path, I've continued to find that I'm either the only Black woman or the only senior Black woman in certain spaces, or that I become the stereotype for what women of color should or should not be like based on outside. And I think we've probably seen that more in the last couple of years. But isn't that also a bit of a superpower? And that's how I look at it. Isn't it great to disrupt and take up space in places where people don't ordinarily expect to find you? Or if they do, they expect for you to be something other than you actually are. I'm Black, I'm a cisgender woman, I'm a working mother of 2, I'm bisexual, I'm a mental health survivor, and they're just some of the many layers that I carry. So for me, breaking the bias is to fully stand in the wholeness of myself, wherever I am, and to continue to create spaces where other people can do exactly the same.
Fascinating. Thank you, Chloe. And last but not least, with the appropriate backdrop, looking very professional, Bernadette, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Paul. It's really great to be here amongst some really power-packed panel across different decades, if I may say. So I'm Bernadette Thompson. I'm the Associate Director of Inclusion for Bart Health Trust. That is my day job, but I suppose my lifelong job is to get this right, get diversity and inclusion right, and make the world a better place for all of us. That is what I believe I've been put on the planet to do. But seriously speaking and reflecting on the theme, break the bias, I'm an activist. I've always been an activist, and an activist intersectioned with a long distance runner means that you never give up on things until you get it right. I used to be a long distance runner. Let me just put that out there. I cannot run to save my life now. I live it through my kids. But I was born in the UK, and my secondary school, just before secondary school, followed my parents back to Nigeria and then came back later on. So I've kind of had a variety, or the spice of life when we talk about diversity. However, when I think about breaking the bias, really thinking about some of the things that I do in my role today, I am that person that gives a voice to the voiceless. That's really important to me. I'm in a particular field of HR deliberately because I really want to try and create that culture where everyone can be themselves and thrive and be treated with dignity and respect. And that's what this title is about. And I was reflecting on break the bias, but there are 3 areas that we can really do this justice. Breaking the bias of self, some of those self-limiting beliefs that have been placed on us by the system. People talk about imposter syndrome. On a day like this, I'm really speaking to every woman out there. Empower yourself. You have every right to be in those spaces that you are. Take your place and make sure you have a voice. Make sure you have a voice. Reflecting further on, is the biases within our system? And Johnny mentioned some of that, right? That we all have bias, but it's what we do with them and how we project that within our spaces. So I believe I'm that person that has to be that voice. Last year's theme was choose to challenge, and that is really important. Breaking the bias, to break is to interrupt that uniformity, that system, and make it go in a different course. And that is what we're talking about today with the theme. Interrupting that status quo. As a woman, you have every right to be there. You have every right to progress within your organization if that is what you want to do. You have every right to be yourself and bring your whole self to work and be treated with dignity and respect. And for me, this is what it's all about. So on a day like this, I'd really get passionate about it, that, you know, ladies, irrespective of those intersectional points which bring their own barriers in themselves, it's a day for us to remember that we have every right to be in the spaces that we are. We must take our place. We must speak out against biases in the system. We must support each other. And together, hopefully, we will create better environments, better workplaces, and, you know, all together, hopefully, especially thinking about the context within the world today, a better world. So I'll hand back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bernadette. And never more true than in the world we're in at the moment, because what's going on in the world is quite frightening. With Break the Bias being the theme, I think maybe we'll now open it up to the first question, if I may, for Chloe. What has been a source of strength for you, Chloe, in your personal or professional life? What has been? You mentioned the department store.
Yeah, I've you know, coming from old school customer service, especially for John Lewis Partnership, was a completely different world. And I think that's my first experience of chosen family without actually having a word for it. So within the communities that I live, so within the Black community and the LGBTQ+ community, we often talk about chosen family, who aren't necessarily your family by blood, but your family made in fire. Well, that's how I define it anyway. And they have always been an amazing source of strength. Family members come and go. They're the people that see you, that elevate you, that recognize your worth, and they amplify that for no other reason than they just want you to be great. And it's having people that also do that for me in my own life, in my personal life, you know, having people that will rally call behind me when I, you know, want to do amazing things. I'm lucky enough to volunteer for some wonderful organisations, UK Black Pride and the London Queer Fashion Show, and the other volunteers that I work alongside who, like Bernadette said, we're all just trying to change the world for ourselves, our younger selves, our children, you know, the next generation to come. It's about having those people alongside you that see those skills that you have and come together to build community and to make those changes. I wouldn't be where I am today without other disruptors, without a Mr. Kent, without other people who continue to see me, without other people who don't necessarily look like me, but have given me the opportunity, and then for me to use that to the betterment of myself and the betterment of others. And I think that will always be a foundational way for me to continue to break biases, for others to break biases, because the reality is the world that we live in isn't always designed for those most marginalized of us within community. If you carry many different identities, and you know, I'm sure all the parents that are on this call, we all laughed last year, the year before, when the whole world went into a flexible working contract, because we have lost opportunities, we have lost access to certain things because we've been working parents. That's just one layer of who we are. It doesn't then supersede all the others. And then when you have those on top, so sometimes you need other people to see you in different spaces that you are in life, regardless of how harsh the discrimination is, because every human deserves to be seen and every human deserves to be given a chance to be great in their life. So yeah, for me, that's always been my personal drive. But how do I elevate and amplify that into what I do through a volunteer lens? How do I do that through the work that we do at Lucky Generals? And it's really about, like I said, being those storytellers and understanding what is it that stops people from being able to show up for themselves and stops people being able to show up by society, and how can we help tell the nuance of those stories? How can we add the touch points that mean that someone can see themselves for the very first time on screen and be inspired to do more and to be better. So I hope that, you know, from 1911 to 2022, that we don't continue to have these types of themes where disruption is so necessary and where we can actually celebrate womanhood more. But I also relish the challenge that until Bernadette said, until we get there and it's done, we'll put our whole foot in it until that point.
Thank you, Chloe. And also in your role as Associate Ambassador for Mental Health First Aid England, that whole concept of mental health and being oneself goes hand in hand. And so that brings it to the fore as well, doesn't it?
It does, and I think today is actually my whole self day for MHFA England. I'm one of the 6 ambassadors. And for me, it's really important to usualize talking about mental health in the mainstream to actually, you know, the statistic was 1 in 4 2.5 years ago. I could say it's probably 1 in 2 now, if not 1 in 1, because the reality is not only us as adults, but our children are all dealing with mental health issues in some aspect, if that's how you define it. But it's about how can you, like I said, show up for all parts of you. I call myself a mental health survivor. I'll be really honest, this morning wasn't really feeling it, whacked on a load of makeup and you're good to go. That's just the reality of my day. But what I'm not going to do is not talk about it. I'm not going to keep it all and internalize it in myself and harm myself, because I did that, and I did that for 10 years, and that's how I ended up being a mental health survivor in the first place. And there are so many other people that will have a similar lens on their story. So you know, I'm no different from anybody else. I have a small amount of privilege that allows me to be able to put a lens on my lived experience in the hope that other people will feel empowered to share theirs. Because if I had this when I was 14, I would probably be a different woman today. I don't dispute, or, you know, I'm not grateful for my journey. But I think that if we can do things that actually help support others, and this isn't just other women, it's other people, it's other humans, how can we bring each other together?
I think communication has improved enormously, and I think employers, and I'm sure Steve will pick up on that, that employers are doing far more. I mean, Michael Page, or Page Group, huge organization, and putting in the structures and the mental health well-being. Once this isn't a mental health session, it's actually about communication, and I think people are opening up more, which inevitably will have an effect on breaking the bias. So Jani, just picking up on challenging bias, how can we go about dealing with it when we see it or experience it? I mean, you know, there has to be an approach which isn't confrontational, but at the same time needs to be absolutely clear in what you're saying and calling it out for what it is.
Well, it's a really important question. I thought a lot about it before our session today, and I've actually kept my answer relatively short because I really felt that Bernadette and Chloe and Steve would also likely have some comments on this. But I came across a really beautiful quote, and it's actually a quote from Oprah. And she says, "Challenges are gifts that force us to search for a new center of gravity. Don't find them, just find a new way to stand." And for me, that new way of standing is to be aware. And Bernadette touched on this in her opening. To be aware for me is in creating change. And there's 2 aspects to this. The first is to be aware of our own biases that we project onto others. So that change has to start within each of us, and each of us have to hold responsibility to commit to doing that. And the second is to be aware of how we react to others' bias of our own selves. There's a really famous author and speaker on the subject of self-development. His name was Dr. Wayne Dyer. Highly recommend all of you reading any of his books because they're incredible. And he has a famous quote that really struck me the first time I heard it. And it goes, "What you think of me is none of my business." I'm just going to say that again so that everyone who's participating, really that resonates, because it applies not just to this, but to so many aspects of life. What you think of me is none of my business. Despite any bias, refuse to allow yourself to have low expectations about what you're capable of creating. And Chloe's, given us examples about how she's done that in her own professional life. And I think by doing that, we then prove to others who express bias against us that their conceptions carry no weight and have no impact upon us. So in my opinion, we don't challenge bias, but if we can all do those two things, then effectively what we do is we just dissolve it. Those are my thoughts.
What you think of me is none of my business. That's very powerful. Very powerful indeed.
Everyone I've ever said that to, gave advice or as a response, it goes in their little notebook or on their phone as a note, and it becomes like a mantra that spreads.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's not meant to be in an arrogant way. It's meant to be about self-awareness, that you just connect to your own self. You're not in a debate with somebody else, because if we all spent our time leading our lives because of what we thought other people thought of us, we would never get anywhere. Yeah.
Steve, if you could travel back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be? And also, have you seen biases change since you became a wheelchair user? If I can ask you that.
Well, if I went back in time, I would have called things out earlier, without doubt. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us say that. I mean, the world has changed, fortunately, a lot over the years, without doubt. And, when I became CEO, I became an ally for gender balance in the business. I could see how wrong things were. I'd been seeing them for a while, and I definitely called things out before I became CEO. But I realized as a leader of the business, I had an opportunity to influence a lot of people, particularly a lot of people that are then involved with a lot of clients, a lot of candidates. We deal with millions of candidates every year. We had a real opportunity to make a difference, not only in our own organization, but others as well. And we did a huge amount of things, and I just wish I'd done a lot of those things before. So we started about 14, 15 years ago. We recruited a lady who'd worked for me for a number of years back into the business. She was at my party at the weekend. She's our global D&I director, ED&I now. And, we've really pushed the agenda to the point where we have gender balance in the business. There's still work to do at certain levels, but generally speaking, we've achieved a lot of the goals we want to achieve. We've not talked about it out externally particularly, but now we're starting to make more and more of a difference. And we've stood up to clients. I mean, I can remember stories 25, 30 years ago, frankly, where, I got a brief that I wasn't prepared to accept, and I wasn't prepared to work with the client. I tried my best to re-educate, but sometimes that's, almost impossible. And we walked away from business because we didn't feel it was right, the stance they were taking towards recruitment. And, none more true. And clearly, my own education continues to improve, and I've understood more and more about intersectionality and the other facets of diversity. We worked very hard many years ago on LGBTQ. And one little story, if I may, when I came out of hospital, obviously a wheelchair user, I couldn't go back to the flat that we were renting while we renovated this house, and because it was on the 3rd floor with no lift, a practical problem. And there was a chap who apparently I've mentored, I didn't realize, but mentored for many, many years, who used to work for me. And I remember about 30 years ago, him inviting me for a coffee. And I said, yeah, of course, I'll come for a coffee with you. And he said, I want you to be the first to know, but I'm gay. And I said, well, I couldn't understand why he was telling me. And I couldn't understand why he thought it would make any difference as well. And, he was an unbelievable performer in our business and an unbelievable friend, and another person who was at my party this weekend. And he realized the problem I had coming out of hospital. This is 30 years later. And he said, look, myself and my husband will move out. My flat is perfect for your needs for the next 6 months while you finish your house. And bless him, he rented the flat in the cellar while I was in the flat at the top of the block, with beautiful views and so on, working out how to deal with life outside of a hospital. And it, you know, what goes around comes around, doesn't it? And it certainly did in that instance. We've also, because I think of the environment we've created at Page, we've created an environment where people feel the courage to be able to speak openly about their different challenges and so on. And we touched there on mental health, and with 8,000 predominantly very young people, we knew this was a challenge within the business, and we pushed on the agenda of ability at Page, and we got a lot of people who are leaders in the business, experienced, respected people in the business, to talk openly about their mental health challenges. And, you know, it surprised me, frankly, and because I knew a lot of them very well, but people talk very openly, very courageously about different challenges that they faced into. And then finally, you know, with disability, if I may, and I know I'm wobbling on, but I remember I got many calls when I was in hospital, many emails. Of course, I'm widely known in Page, but I was called by somebody who used to work at Page, was more senior than me and had retired many years before. And he rang me up and he said, look, I sort of understand what you're going through. I'm disabled as well. He said, what are you going to do when you get out of hospital? And I said, well, I'm definitely going to take my daughter down the aisle, bearing in mind I'm paying, but also I'm a dad. I'm very proud of that day. Of course, I want to go to the Rugby World Cup in Japan, because everyone knows I love my rugby and played till I was 40. And I said, fine, I'm going to go back to work and finish the job that I was doing before. And he said, you can't. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, you're in a wheelchair. And I said, I know that. And he said, well, no one will take you seriously. And I remember my instant reaction to that was to record a video, because I realized a lot of people thought that I was going to recover and go running with them again and so on. I'd run around the world on the Great Wall of China, all sorts of places, and you know, for charity. And I thought I'd better tell them exactly what's happened and how I'm going to deal with this and so on. And I recorded a 20-minute video telling them my story of how I got rescued and you know, the time in hospital and so on, and how I felt about it. And to be fair, I got pretty upset on the video, and I sent it out on social media to the 8,000 people that work for me. And you know, I wanted to show them the authenticity that as leaders, we're all vulnerable. You know, we all have our challenges, different ones. I've lived a very privileged life. I'm very lucky, but you know, we all have our challenges. And you know, if we don't have the authenticity to talk about it, the honesty and the vulnerability that we we have, however we look. I may not look very vulnerable, you know, I realize I look like a big tough 6'4" chap, you know, but we're all vulnerable, and I needed to show it to make others feel that they can show their vulnerability as well. And I think, again, I've learned a lot by different things in my life, which has been a long life, but and I think that's now making a difference, I hope.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Steve. Bernadette, just picking up on one of the questions that's been posted. Please do post some questions in the Q&A. And the question is, how can we say that success is different for everyone and success isn't just getting to the top?
Oh, definitely. Success cannot just be getting to the top, because not everyone wants to get to the top. So for me, I always say, look, we want people to have fruitful careers, whatever that might be. That might be, you know, being the next chief exec, or that might be just progressing in the role that you're in there. But I think what is important, that people shouldn't feel that they're disadvantaged because of their gender. And that's what's really important. So having those conversations. So we're doing a lot around career conversations and career development within Bart at the moment. Asking that question and not assuming, what do you want from your career? I know you've got 5 children, but that doesn't mean I don't want to progress because I've got 5 children, you know. So it's really having that conversation to find, and I don't have 5 children, by the way. I can just about manage with the 2 I've got. but it's asking the question and making sure people aren't disadvantaged and not treating people in a different way. That is really important. So it's not necessarily about getting to the top. However, and the big H, however, is we do need those visible role models. We do need women to come out and say, you know, it wasn't that great for me in the beginning, but these are the hurdles that I've, and the barriers that I've had to navigate, and you can do it too. And I'm not special because I'm, you know, and now a senior person. So I think we need that balance as well. But people really, you know, this isn't about, oh yeah, just getting into the top, you know, wrapping it around the conversation we've just had around mental health. It's about making sure we have people who are thriving. And what does thriving mean? It's you can only determine how you thrive. So, you know, it's about all of that. It's whatever you want from your career.
And Bernadette, you mentioned role models. Who would be your role model that you?
My role model, the activist that I am, has to be Rosa Parks. I would want to be that Rosa. I would have been the person sitting next to her on the bus, because for me, quoting Martin Luther King, when we become silent on a matter, our lives begin to end. It's really important for me to have my voice, not lose it, and use it. Where people, you know, there are people who might not forever, for whatever reason, have that voice. So for me, it's really about being the voice of the voiceless. So it has to be Rosa Parks. I mean, what she did in the day was so brave. It was so courageous. And, you know, fast forwarding to today, we need so many other people to speak up on issues like this. You know, I like what Steve said just now. We need men as allies to speak up, and that's how we've progressed to where we are today. However, thinking about gender equality, I'm one of those that campaign for more inclusive gender equality. When I intersect it with ethnicity, I came from the civil service. I spent 23 years in the civil service. Growing up in the civil service, I didn't see many women in senior positions that looked like me. Right now in the civil service, it's absolutely brilliant. We're more or less 50-50 with permanent secretaries, women versus men. However, we do not have a female permanent secretary currently that looks like me, 21st day UK government. So for me, we really need to keep our eye on that intersectional aspect, especially around ethnicity. When we talk about gender equality, it has to be for all women. We need to really look at that. Who are the women who have progressed within our organization? We need to be forensic with our data and look at our data that way. And for us in the West as well, we need to think about these issues globally, because there's still women in some countries that do not have that voice. So, you know, as we progress in the West, we cannot leave other women. We need to make sure that we are inclusive to all women across the globe. So we have progressed in the West, I would say. Across the world, yes, but there is so much more. Bucket loads to be done.
Thank you. Gianni, one question just come in. What are some of the spiritual practices that you could share with us that can help us challenge our own judgments and biases? So some of the spiritual practices that you referred to with your spiritual master.
Well, I think, I don't know how many people who are on the panel or listening in are meditators, but as most know, meditation is, you know, the foremost discipline that we use in Eastern spiritual traditions. I began sitting for meditation when I was 4 years old, and I would sit for an hour every day. And to this day, I still wake at 4:30 every morning and I sit for an hour of meditation. And if you read on meditation, it has a lot of physical benefits for the mind and the body. But equally, what it does is it gets you, when you're sitting in a comfortable position and you're not moving, you become very aware of all of your thoughts. And that practice then leaves the meditation mat with you and goes into the day. So you become very aware of a very simple phrase that Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a great Buddhist meditation teacher who recently passed away, he has a phrase that says, "The past is no longer there and the future is not yet here. We only have this present moment." And when you're very conscious of your thoughts, one issues of bias arise, and you then become very aware of when you're judging other people. You then become very aware of the nature of their judgment when it's put upon you. So I would say the most important spiritual practice that anybody can do to benefit every experience that they have in their life and also improve their life existence would be meditate. And you should really sit for 20 minutes every morning at the same time in a quiet place in your house, a designated place that you never ever leave, that's always there. It's like your own place of prayer. And you just focus your mind on your inhalations and exhalations, and then you'll begin to see that your mind begins to calm, and you'll take that sense of relaxation and peace into the day with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jani. Chloe, one of the questions how do you protect your energy and manage your time? Time management.
Next question. No, I'm joking. It is something that I haven't perfected, and I don't think I ever will. I look to friends and family first and foremost, or I read. I love reading. My favorite author is Nalini Singh. I will reread her books over and over again, and that place of meditation, like you said, Yanni, of I can completely turn my mind off, get lost in her world, and that's my safe space. I also go floating, which is very much, it's an isolation tank, and will just completely turn my brain off and be in blackness in about 3 inches of salted water. It, for me, is an amazing way to just completely reset my body and recharge my energy. And I should probably do it more often. But that thing about time is, I'm still juggling that bit at the moment.
Mm. And any particular, general to anyone really, any particular reading or resources that would be useful for people to pick up on as a guide? I mean, on the meditation side, and someone starting out on that. Jani, have you got any?
I'll think of some books. It's hard because when you grow up in this tradition, you don't read, you're just taught.
Yeah.
What I would say is I don't recommend apps, because what the apps do is you're listening to somebody else take you through a practice. And what you want to do is just be conscious of your own self in that practice and not be distracted by somebody else's voice. So all you have to do is sit in a comfortable position and focus your mind on your inhalations and exhalations. And every time you have a thought, which will be every 0.0003 seconds, just keep on bringing your mind back to your breath until you find that the space between the thoughts begins to distance. I will think of some books, but in terms of self-help authors and self-development authors, I highly recommend Dr. Wayne Dyer's work. He passed away several years ago, but he was such an incredible author on awareness and how to live a more joyful life. Very important work.
Bernadette, you got any pointers?
So I'm not a reader. As soon as I finished my degrees, I dumped my books. Shh, don't tell my mum. So I do love a good TED Talk. So I have a few TED Talks that I can think about. Clint Smith, The Danger of Silence, and especially on a day like this, why we must not be silent on matters that matter to us. Chidimana Adichie, and she had a fantastic TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. I really do like that one. So, you know, if you Google any of this, it can come up, but I know that the list is going to be circulated. And finally, you know, a lot of the time people say, me, I'm not biased. Johnny, what do you mean that everyone has a bias? There's a really fantastic TED Talk by Kirsten Pressner, and it's Are You Biased? I Am. So that's a great one to listen to. So yeah. They're the 3 top ones from me.
Great. Steve, anything?
Yeah, I mean, look, anything by Matthew Syed I like, I have to say. I do like, and it sounds very, not for a bloke that's particularly academic, but I do like the Harvard Business Review as well. And I learn a lot in there, you know, again, around diversity. They write a lot of great articles. There's also a good, I know we shouldn't go to apps, but on YouTube, there's a very good equal opportunity, different starting lines. But look, I don't read a huge amount either, and I don't get a lot of time to sit still. And certainly as a disabled person, I found that my time management has become even better than it had to be before as a CEO, because everything takes so much longer when you're disabled, as you can imagine, even just getting up in the morning. And I find actually sport for me is the time to clear my head. And I was a big runner as well. And I ran before. Now, obviously, I have to do different sports for that. But if I'm doing something, cardio or whatever, it's a really good time for me to clear my head and clear my thoughts and think about things and so on. But also, I tend to go for the practical things of trying to understand diversity and different aspects of diversity. And we have shadow boards. So all of our boards, so our executive board, for example, that runs the company, we have a shadow board beneath that is far more diverse than the evolutionary board that we've created, that frankly is almost representative of how we were 25 years ago. So we have a shadow board that's totally diverse, and I learn a huge amount from them. And also I have reverse mentors, so people in our business that are manager level or director level that can help educate me and make me understand things that I just don't understand. And so I'm being reverse mentored at the moment, and have been in the past, and I find that hugely it's a practical way, and some of us are more practical than theoretical, but maybe and not necessarily good at reading. So although I do read a bit, I do find those practical solutions, and definitely allyship, I think, is incredible in terms of being able to it works two ways, learn as well.
Thank you. General question that's come in. What do you think is the best starting point for a workplace looking to introduce active steps to break bias and promote allyship? So, from a blank sheet of paper, workplace looking to introduce steps to break the bias and promote allyship. Wow. Yes, I suppose it's good to start with a blank sheet of paper, but I would hope that you might have already started on the journey a while back. But anyway, Chloe, do you want to?
That's a big piece of paper.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
You have to self-interrogate first, because there's no point of doing the work and not acknowledging what the problem is. It's just a band-aid on a gaping wound. So I would say first assess where you are, self-interrogate where the bias is coming from, and then that's where you can go down that road of allyship, versus to try and, we've done an unconscious bias training, okay, we fixed it. That's not enough. It's got to be foundational. So
yeah,
that would be my make the paper into a shape.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. What about tips to entice employees into industries which perhaps could be hindered by stereotypical gender bias? What if people out there that are maybe wanting to get into a particular sector that is more focused, any ideas?
Role models are really important, and I think it's catching them young. So the going into schools is really important. Young people, they're of a different breed. So I know a lot of the times organizations have school outreach, and they target children in the secondary school. I think sowing the seed at primary and actually getting them to be hungry for that knowledge. Oh, what do you do? And children ask the most fantastic questions, and that follows them. So I think at every level, really going out, having those visible role models, those having those women, especially in the tech industry, because I know that that's an issue. We have issues around, I think, economists with regards to gender. I remember this from working in the Treasury. So we really need to have role models, women who have succeeded specifically in those areas, to go out and share their journey and, you know, be honest. You know, at some point, some of them didn't know what they wanted to do and they stumbled on that career, but how they've thrived and how they've progressed in it. So I think we really need to start at the primary and move up, but at every level of the education system, share those stories, because storytelling is one of the things that really does pull on the apron strings. And when we start thinking about secondary school, I'm talking about GCSEs, A levels, making sure that the conversation is there with the parents as well, because sometimes parents can hinder some children in following a path that they may want to. So sometimes it's about convincing the parent as well that this is an industry where their child can thrive, I think.
Johnny, you said that bias is a judgment, and with children, at what age do they start forming their judgments and bias? Because as we move into the different generations, you would hope that actually the openness and the communication is improved as each generation goes by. We would hope that we are moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in my experience as a parent, I would say that, and I had twin girls who are 16 years old now, but I would say I remember when they were 6 years old, they began to make comments on other schoolmates. And when I was at Independent, we actually launched a platform called Kidspiration, where we had young children interviewing well-respected thought leaders in the world to inspire other young children to really nurture and follow their passions. And then we rebranded that to LOUD, which means live out your dreams. And we've been doing qualitative tests to get that into the primary school system, sort of pointing to what Bernadette said about the importance of focusing on children. I think parents have a role, very important role now, which has evolved more so, and the importance of this is to really engage your children in conversation about the importance of kindness and compassion, how they're treating others within their classroom, how they feel they're being treated. And it's more important to ask your son or your daughter, who did you have lunch with today, rather than what did you learn? That's what I think. I think that experience of like, what's the nurture in the community that's being built around children is so important as they go into life. And as parents, that's the role model that we have to be. What kind of person, what's the nature of the person that you want to become? What's the nature of the people that you want to spend time with, right? We are our community. So I think that's important. And I also think as business leaders, kindness and compassion is the most important thing we can offer in our companies.
Certainly what the world needs now more than anything, kindness and compassion. Gosh, thank you, Johnny, thank you. Bernadette, what are some practical tips to finding your voice in the workplace? I'm a relatively junior female of an ethnic background and can sometimes find it difficult to share my thoughts.
Good question, absolutely. And I always say, I always quote the incredible power in employee network groups. So I do recognize that it's really, really difficult. Not everyone is going to be a bit of a loud activist like me. I used to be a trade union rep, so my style is slightly different to most people. I do recognize that. But, you know, going through your trade union. So if you're not a member of a trade union, I always say to people, don't wait until you fall into a bit of bother before you then want to join a trade union within your organization, if your organization has one. But employee network groups are absolutely brilliant. There is something about going to your employee network group and, you know, letting them understand your lived experience, and they can then approach the senior leaders within your organization to say, our members, this is what is coming from our membership. I used to chair Cross-Government Race Network for 5 years, and it was absolutely brilliant when I could take those lived experiences to our senior colleagues to say, look, it's not one, it's not two, but there are few people saying the same thing. So look, let's support you to tackle some of these knotty issues within the organization. So I would recommend you join an employee network group, not just join, be an active member, because we really do need a lot of help. Employee network groups, they're passionate people, but you know, they need all hands on deck, and then they can support you in bringing that concern to the fore. But, you know, if I always encourage people to join a trade union, because they can be the voice for you if you have any specific issues that link to policies, practices, and employee relations.
Great, thank you, Bernadette. And then just finally, do we have any action points we can take away as business leaders to ensure we are helping to break the bias? That's a wide open question, that. I think you can answer it by saying yes, but yes, some action points, practical action points to help us break the bias.
I mean,
Steve.
I'll just jump in really quickly, go back to what I said about, you know, in relation to kindness and compassion. And within our company, we try and do a couple of practical things every month to open up the conversation, to kind of nurture that sort of sense of not so much breaking the bias, it's just much more about being aware and creating positivity so that you dissolve the bias. We do a gratitude lunch the last Thursday of every month. And everyone comes together, we provide the food, and everyone has to say something that they're grateful for. Not work related, just grateful for in their life. And it really brings a sense of togetherness, of shared human experience, to, you know, going back to what Steve was talking about before, the importance of being authentic and human. As leaders, I think you have to show your vulnerability. So Chloe said, you know, just kind of crazy day, just putting on the makeup and trying to get up, you know, show up, right? It's showing that we're all in this together, and therefore we can all do it together. That's always my philosophy. There's no hierarchy.
Very good. We're all human. We've got the same vulnerabilities. We're nothing special, and that's a very good truism. That, Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
I totally agree with Johnny. I mean, the reality is we are, and although we've got to make the big decisions, the big calls, and so on, and sometimes some very tough decisions as leaders, the reality is as well, we can always give our human side an airing as well to help others. And I just want to come back to something you asked earlier about companies, you know, that are particularly non-diverse, and how do they approach diversity? And I've spoken at a couple, and I'll give you one industry. I'm in the building industry. You know, I think it's they've found it very challenging over the years, and I've spoken at a couple of events for the Builders Merchants Federation, and you know, for example, and of course, on gender, on many areas, certainly disability, they really are not very diverse. And it's interesting, over the last year or two, I mean, this war for talent has only just really kicked off. I mean, it's great from the perspective that Page are having their most successful time at the moment, and our results are amazing, and companies are struggling to recruit people. But it is amazing as well how many of those companies that are struggling to recruit people keep fishing in the same old pools. And you know, they go about it in a diverse way, recruiting, you know, in their own image, and that's got to stop. And as leaders, I think you've got to be the one that breaks that down and stops it happening. The reality is companies will perform better the more diverse they are. That's the reality. They'll make better decisions as a result of diversity. And that means they've got to think about the people they're recruiting. They cannot carry on recruiting exactly what they've recruited in the past. And so they've got to work that through. Now, that's a multitude of different challenges, of course. One is how you're sourcing candidates right the way through to, of course, how you're interviewing them, and making sure that you're making non-diverse decisions. But I really think that is critical. And there are always, yeah, and there's always solutions. Sorry.
Certainly, Matthew Syed is a great advocate of you recruit people from varied world, not your image of yourself, because you can progress. Okay, we're just coming up to 11 o'clock. I think it's 1 minute past. So a big thank you to our panelists and for coming along this morning, giving up their time. Bernadette, Chloe, Johnny, and Steve. Really appreciate some great words of wisdom and some you know, some really good. I've come away with a few points. What you think of me is none of my business, which is a chair of a panel is great. So thank you all for watching. Please continue to reflect on breaking the bias and continue the conversation. I think it's important we communicate both at home and also obviously in the workplace. So thank you for watching. We will be getting a recording out in the next day or so, and enjoy the rest of International Women's Day. Stay safe, and goodbye from us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.